Let's review the previous week and dive deeper into some of the performances of these Charlotte Hornets before getting into tonight's recap against the Cavs. If I'm taking a look at this week as a whole, I think there's several players that you can look to, but I'm going to start by highlighting Kelly Oubre. Heading into tonight's game, averaging 26 points on 49% shooting, and 13 of 25 on shots from distance. He was also 13 from 13 from the free throw line heading into the game. Oubre did not play tonight against the Cavs with some discomfort in his back. He's doing a great job of getting downhill, and the shots don't necessarily always result in rim attempts, but I think that's the goal. Like, that's his initiative, is to not always take shots from deep. He's still, generally speaking, a volume shooter from behind the arc. But even if he's not getting all the way to the rim, he's getting into that short mid range area where he is hitting floaters and runners at a pretty good clip. And one thing I noted way back in December or November, earlier in the season, when I was picking up on some of the new player trends, was that Oubre was playing more as a pick and roll ball handler. In 43 games heading into the Cavaliers game, he has run 155 possessions as the pick and roll ball handler. That's a 17.9 frequency rate. That is a larger chunk than what we saw last season. Last season, in more games, he ran less possessions as a pick and roll ball handler, only 71. So Oubre still has more games to play. So that gap between those possessions are only going to go up. And the frequency is about a gap of about 12% in terms of that rate of running more plays as a pick and roll ball handler. And part of that has to do with some of the injuries and the role that he has played this year in terms of having the ball in his hands a little bit more. The Hornets do not have Miles Bridges this season, and he was probably one of the larger roles when it comes to putting pressure on the rim. And what's interesting, even with the upped frequency, his efficiency has been better out of these situations. So it's not like Clifford tried something and went away from it because of the dip in efficiency. He actually is doing a whole lot better job of scoring out of these situations. He's scoring 0.92 points per possession compared to 0.66 in 21-22. And these are the plays, too, when you see him, when he's going through these pick and roll progressions, he's very similar to Rozier in terms of keeping the defender on his back and weaving his way through the defense on his way to the basket. And I think he's done an excellent job as a player that's trying to score out of the pick and roll in these past 4 games. Well, I guess past 3 games. He didn't play in tonight's game for the week here. So he's never going to be a guy that is a passer out of these spots, but it's good to see him in these opportunities. With LaMelo out, you're going to see players like Hayward, Rozier, Oubre being used more as a primary ball handler, in addition to Dennis Smith Jr. as well. And in terms of another player that I would like to point out, I know that Rozier has had a good week, and the same with Hayward, but I want to chat about Nick Richards. He said he's had such a interesting story to this season with his inconsistent up and down play time, his role. And it's not necessarily his fault, but heading into tonight's game against the Cavaliers, he was 11 of 15 from the field. He led the team in total rebounds with 23, and he continues, like, this is his biggest like storyline of the season. He continues to impress on the offensive glass. He's really good at positioning himself to where he can not only get the rebound because he's so massive, but he also is at an advantage to where the opponents have to foul him. And in the process, he's gotten a few and ones on the week as well. But I think what's been so frustrating for Richards, and I'd assume it's frustrating for him, is that his play for the most part this season has been very consistent for the majority of the season. And you know what you are getting from him on a nightly basis. He is a big, that is a pick and roll, not necessarily a lob threat, but a pick and roll rim pressure guy that sets hard screens. Sometimes he gets in trouble and sets too hard of screens or doesn't quite get all the way over and is called for fouls. He is probably the biggest offender on this team when it comes to fouls on setting screens, but he rolls hard. He gets most of his buckets around the rim. And, offensively, he's very limited in terms of what he can do, but that's one thing that he does bring. And even if he's not involved in the play, not a primary guy with the pick and roll, if something else is happening and he is just roaming around the basket, he's going to try to find a way to get on the offensive glass. And that's continued to show up on a nightly basis where he is just continuing to get good positioning and grab those offensive boards and get those putbacks. And that is something that he continues to show on a nightly basis. I think where he lost his spot was not because any kind of dip in play. It was because he got injured and Mark Williams had arrived on the scene. And with Plumlee still in the fold at this point, he was kind of relegated to some spot minutes here and there. I think what's going to be interesting, not only to end the season in terms of how he's evaluated, but his play style is very similar to Mark. And I wonder if that affects the way that the Hornets move forward this offseason with him being a free agent. I'm not sure he's going to be a priority for the Hornets. I don't necessarily think he'd be expensive by any means, but does it make a ton of sense to have Mark Williams, I guess depending on how the lottery goes too, but does it make a whole lot of sense to have Mark Williams on the roster and Nick Richards being the backup when they play very similar roles? I think sometimes having, continuity within the system is great and all, but having a change up off the bench and playing a different play style while still being productive, I think that's beneficial at times. So who knows how the lottery is going to go, but even if the Hornets don't luck into Wembanyama at number 1 overall and not drafting a center, because if they're not 1 overall, they're not going to be drafting a center. I still do wonder if Nick Richards is a part of the future moving forward. Now, I know he's gotten a ton of praise from the coaching staff and the front office, and he's shown tremendous strides in terms of his improvement. He's another guy that is a second-round pick from Mitch Kupchak that has proven to be very valuable. But when it's all said and done, I'm just not sure, and we'll probably have this conversation as we get closer to free agency in the offseason. But no fault of his own. Nick Richards has had a very consistent season, but we'll see if he's actually back with the Charlotte Hornets next season.